Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this, the 30th of May 2025. Today I'm going to continue with study of a Muslim mystic community in Britain, meaning in the West and for the West, which is a study of Maulana Shaykh Nazim's community by Professor Tayfun Atay. I'm reading from page 116 of the book, Being Both an Insider and an Outsider. In anthropological fieldwork, two contrasting perspectives, those of the outsider and insider, are often distinguished. The outsider perspective is that of the anthropologist who comes from another culture and to an alien setting in which she or he conducts their fieldwork. The insider perspective, on the other hand, is that of an anthropologist who studies the culture of which she or he is or feels part. Each of these perspectives has its advantages and disadvantages. For an outsider anthropologist, everything is new and nothing is taken for granted. The insider anthropologist, on the other hand, will have no difficulty at language comprehension and will have different and perhaps better ways of comprehending various facets of the culture. As far as the anthropology of religion is concerned, there is a continuing, although tentative, argument that insists that someone who is not religious can never understand what it is like to be a religious person. Professor Atay says, on the basis of my own fieldwork experience, I would argue that we should add a third category. Being a member of Turkish culture and a nominal Muslim, I shared much with the Sheikh and the Murids of the Turkish origins. Coming from a secular background and devoid of any religious experience, however, I was an outsider. This was a controversial position, which, as I mentioned above, we had mentioned in previous chapters, created a particular set of difficulties and pressures. On occasions when the members of the community might have understood the ignorance of a researcher from a Western, i.e., Christian setting, I was questioned and embarrassed by my ignorance. On the other hand, the questions I asked, had they been asked by a devout Muslim researcher, might have easily and satisfactorily been answered, but I was treated with suspicion and misled. All in all, the experience which took me from a world in which was antagonistic to and irritated by the Muslim green to the green world of Islam, and in the end left me at the margins of both, i.e., in a sort of nowhere land, makes me reflect that identities, and more importantly, feelings, are not natural acquisitions, but they are created within discourses conditioned by different rules in different societal settings. As White put forward, discourse unfolds in every society within the context of external restraints, which appear as rules of exclusion, rules which determine what can be said and not said, who has the right to speak on a given subject, what will constitute reasonable and what foolish actions, what will count as true and what will count as false. These rules limit the conditions of discourse's existence in different ways at different times and places, whence the distinction, arbitrary but taken for granted in all societies, between proper, reasonable, responsible, sane, and truthful discourse on the one hand, and improper, unreasonable, irresponsible, insane, and erroneous discourse on the other. This is from White, 1990, page 89, I'm guessing that references. So you see, what Professor Atay is discussing here is the fact that each of us has our cultural heritage as our background. Now, he was an anthropologist studying the Naqshbandi community in London. and also across the UK. So he was approaching this as an anthropologist. An anthropologist is someone who studies communities of people and the way they live. And he was saying that on the one hand, he was like a outsider to this community because he wasn't religious, even though he was Turkish, even though he was nominally Muslim. Maybe occasionally went to the mosque, but he wasn't particularly practicing. And on the other hand, he wasn't exactly like totally secular, totally from a different background. He wasn't from a Christian background or from a British or German or one of these European backgrounds where a person wouldn't really have known anything about Islam. So there would have been things that he was familiar with and things which he wasn't. As someone who was nominally Muslim, but he wasn't practicing, there were aspects of Islam which he was not aware of, especially within the Sufi tariqah setting, which is a bit more specialist. On the other hand, there were things that he was familiar with. You know, he could speak Turkish fluently. He knew certain things about Islam. He wasn't completely uh, he wasn't completely devoid of any kind of understanding of this. So he was in an interesting position. He could understand certain things, but other things were new to him. And it's important to understand this because today you get a lot of Muslims, and when they meet Muslims from another, even Muslims that come from another country or another background, maybe they practice Islam a bit differently or understand Islam a bit differently. And those Muslims will judge the other Muslims that they meet who don't come up to their standards of what they are used to. And so they think there's something wrong when actually there's nothing wrong. It's just that they understand things from a slightly different perspective. Doesn't necessarily mean there's any wrong in that. Also, when you get people who convert to Islam, you get a lot of Muslims who will suddenly say, "Oh, it's easy. Everything's easy when you become Muslim. It's not difficult." And you know, on one level, that should be true. If you understand the Quran, if you understand Islam deeply, you are not going to create difficulties for new Muslims because you will understand that Islam is supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be difficult. It's not supposed to seem alien and be this like foreign culture that you are pressured to adopt. Like when I embraced Islam, people gave me shawar kameez. People were expecting me to conform to a Pakistani type and approach to Islam, which is really a lot more about Pakistani culture, or even not just Pakistani culture, but a type of Pakistani culture. It's not even like every type of Pakistani culture, it is a particular type of Pakistani culture. And people were expecting that. Whereas, of course, I'm an Englishman. No disrespect towards Pakistanis, but I have my own cultural ways. I have my own language. I have my own dress sense. So I'm not going to conform to that. I'm not going to practice Islam in that particular way. In a similar way, Professor Atay, who was coming from a secular Turkish background, he had his own approach to life and towards faith and Islam. And it wasn't necessarily what some people in the community were expecting. So he was explaining here that I was in some ways an insider and in some ways an outsider. And as he got to know the community as well, he adopted certain things and, you know, become a bit more of an insider, but he still wasn't completely, he wasn't one of them. He wasn't a murid of the Sheikh. But this is, I mean, some people who are murids of our Sheikh, they might think he was missing out in quite a big way in this respect. I get where they're coming from. But from a social studies perspective, from an anthropological perspective, this was a strength because he was impartial. So he could give us a perspective that was an impartial perspective of our Naqshbandi community. And that is actually useful for us also to be able to do some introspection ourselves and to understand the things that our community is doing right and understand things that the community is doing wrong. And it is also, you know, it also has its issues as well. And I get that. But I think we should appreciate where he was coming from. I'll read a bit more, and this is the next part, ritual. He's called it ritual, the Zikr ceremony. At the center of Sufi practice is the Zikr, the ritual remembrance of Allah by reciting his names and attributes in a particular manner. The Zikr is, in one word, essential for Sufi orders. On many occasions, the disciples in London differentiate their own way of living Islam from the other Islamic traditions by specifying the performance of the zikr ceremony. The ways of performing zikr, its rules and regulations are different and particular to every Sufi order. In London, the Naqshbandi Zikr ceremonies are led or directed by Shaykh Nazim, or, I mean, this is going back to the 90s, remember, or in his absence, by some prominent tariqah representatives to whom the Shaykh has given permission, rushat, to do so. The Zikr gatherings are more than merely occasions for ritual performance. They are also settings of social communications and interaction between the members of the Sufi order. As Gilsanan, 1973, 176 puts it, the members are brought together socially in these ritual gatherings that are so important in the social cohesion of the group. The members of Shaykh Nazim's Naqshbandi community in London, too, maintain their social relations through these gatherings, particularly in the absence of the Shaykh from London. I think this is another important aspect to understand. Uh, an aspect of these zikr ceremonies, aside from the actual remembrance of Allah and the religious aspect of it, is these are opportunities when Naqshbandis, and it's also true in other Sufi orders, when their Sufi adherents, they come together as a community and they build those friendships, they build those relationships, and they also do a lot of what Christians would call fellowship, basically supporting each other socially, supporting each other in their spiritual journeys. And also, it's like even practically, if they're going through things, they have people in the community that they can support each other. And it's an important aspect of community in that respect. There are different types of zikr, and classifications in this respect are various. The zikr can be done as vocally or silently hidden. It can be done by the tongue, without the contribution of the heart, or by the heart, or by both the tongue and the heart. Which is the most difficult and can be performed only by those who are at the most advanced states of Sufism. Gunduz, 1984b, 272-3. The zikr is either performed individually by every single murid in his or her private life, or communally with the congregations of murids in places such as private houses, mosques, or public halls. It is the communal zikr or gatherings which I described here as the ritual ceremonies of the Sufi orders. With some minor exceptions, the communal zikr is performed vocally in the circles of Shaykh Nazim's London Naqshbandi community. This represents a certain deviation from the main Naqshbandi tradition. I will touch on this issue elsewhere. The private individual zikr, which is called vid, yeah, that's what he's called it in Turkish. It's orad, yeah, will also be touched upon briefly later. The talks in the zikr occupy an important place in Naqshbandi discourse. Above all, the zikr is depicted as an act or an attempt to achieve the supremacy of the soul, the ruh, over the nafs, which is the lower self. The notion of nafs constitutes one of the major themes of Sufi Islam and will be elaborated in the next chapter. Here, I will give a synopsis of the issue in connection with the zikr ritual. The Murids believe that human nature is based on the continuous struggle between one's nafs, i.e., the physical existence, and worldly intentions, and the ruh, i.e., the spiritual existence, the soul, basically. The essential task of Sufi activity is to work for the triumph of ruh, which represents Allah in man, and is located at the heart, qalb, over the nafs, which is identified with shaitan and focuses on the mind, the akal. The zikr, therefore, is a means for separating the physical from the spiritual existence and achieving the free movement of the latter towards the divine reality, haq. The experience of zikr was explained by another Turkish murid with the following phrase: "We defeated our nafs and pleased our ruh." Sheikh Ali emphasized the antagonism between nafs and ruh and pointed out that zikr aimed to clean the heart where the ruh is located. The zikr, he asserted, was the brush of the heart. It sweeps everything from the heart and makes it clean. Otherwise, shaitan will dominate and control the heart, which is the most terrible thing. Shaitan continuously struggles to capture the control of the heart. The only way to help someone protect his or her heart, apart from, sorry, the only way to help someone protect his or her heart from shaitan's attacks is the zikr. The Shaykh in this respect pointed out that when your hearts are occupied by the holy names of Allah and existence, there is no place for shaitan. As mentioned in the hadith, the Prophet said, if a person is going to be distracted from Zikr Allah, i.e., the remembrance of Allah, shaitan, having a trunk of bad things, puts them into his heart or begins to send him bad things. Therefore, the most important means we are using against shaitan is the zikr. How do we kill our ego? By saying, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God alone. This is beautiful. I mean, bear in mind, this is written by a secular Turk studying our Naqshbandi order. And this is absolutely right. This is accurate description of what we do. And the thing is, when you think about this as well, the if your heart is not remembering Allah, if your heart isn't occupied with higher consciousness, what's going to be in your heart? I mean, you can see it today. You just look at a lot of the content on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and things like this. What kind of nonsense is this? This is what most people are filling their minds and their heart with. What benefit is that? And we've all done it at some point or another. But what benefit is that? But if you focus on higher things, if you focus on even people who focus intellectually on something, they're on a better level than people who are focusing on nonsense like that. But if you don't have a focus of something which is higher, then obviously your mind and your heart is going to get distracted and it's going to be filled with things with the lowest common denominator. People ask us why we do this and they don't understand. Some people, they accuse us, some people from other Muslim groups, they accuse us of doing bid'ah. But think about it. Even like reading Quran, the Salah, all of these things are forms of zikr. And you're filling your heart with the remembrance of Allah. Or if you're not doing that and you're learning, you're also filling your mind and your heart with knowledge that's useful, beneficial. But if you're not doing either of these things, what are you filling your mind and your heart with? Uh, Professor Atay continues. Besides, the zikr is the modus operandi of Sufi Islam. It is through the ritual that the Sufi mystical idea of making contact with divine reality is said to be realized. Therefore, the essential point in the zikr is to forget everything, even to suppose everything non-existent, and to think only about Allah. Qara 1990 200. And again, this is another thing where when some of the people were what they were saying, what they were doing, which was making which was making Professor Ate feel awkward in their presence, feel out of place. They were questioning why he was there. They were not actually doing dhikr. If these murids were doing dhikr, if they were thinking Allah first, if they were filling out their heart with Allah, would they have been judging him? Of course not. And we see this now. I see it so many times within tariqah. And we're all human. We all make mistakes. But I'm drawing attention to it because it's important. A leading Turkish Cypriot murid considered the zikr as the only thing which was done by a person exclusively for Allah. Apart from this half-hour zikr here once a week, everything we do throughout the week is for this world. We do nothing for Allah except the zikr, which is done completely for Him. The Murids give some other explanations of the objective of the zikr, which are psychological and functional in orientation. According to a young Turkish Cypriot Marid, coming together for the Zikr at least once a week helps members of the community to overcome the depression and stress they face in a foreign country, in which they feel lonely and insecure. Sheikh Ali said that there was so much corruption in the West that they were doing the Zikr in order to cope with this corrupt world. When somebody does this Zikr one night every week, argued a Turkish Cypriot Marid, that would be the most effective solution or remedy for his or her difficulties and troubles. Written elsewhere, the zikr is suggested as the only effective treatment for people's social and psychological sufferings everywhere in the modern world, particularly in the West, such as unhappiness, depression, injustice, the lack of love, the breakup of relationships, the destruction of the environment, etc. I've I've heard of all these things and I'm aware as well. There are a number of blessings that come with doing zikr, and this is just touching on the subject. Um, I think I will close it there today. Um, I hope you found that useful and a good reflection, because I know a lot of you would not have even seen this book, let alone read it. You have to really hunt this book out. But I think it does give a useful perspective, and I've seen the viewing figures, and I can see that people are obviously watching this and inshallah benefiting from it. And if that be the case, then alhamdulillah, I'm happy. That's the reason I do this. So may Allah bless you all. I pray you all have a very good evening if you're here in the UK, or whatever time of the day it is, wherever you are. And have a wonderful and blessed weekend. Until next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.